She ran from the most powerful man on the continent, carrying a secret that could change everything. For 5 years, Maren lived under a false name, in a forgotten border town, raising her 2 children completely alone. She sold what she had. She worked with what remained. She loved those children with everything inside her, and never, not once, allowed them anywhere near his territory. She knew that if he saw them, it would all be over. Because the children had his eyes, the same silver gaze, the same stubborn jaw, the same unmistakable way of occupying a room as though the entire world were simply a problem waiting to be solved. She had been rejected by him, publicly, coldly. With rational arguments, she spent 5 years repeating to herself every time she felt something she was no longer allowed to feel. But then the fire came, and the flight through the forest, and the wrong border at the wrong moment. And now she is standing in the great hall of Blackmount Palace, 6 steps behind her 4-year-old daughter, who has just looked directly up at the Alpha King and said, with the absolute certainty of a small person who simply names what she sees, "You look just like us, Alpha King." What comes next will shatter everything she believed about the rejection, about the lie, about who truly destroyed what could have been, and about what can still be saved. The moment that will split Maren's life in 2 does not announce itself with fire or thunder. It arrives in a child's voice, her daughter's voice, clear and guileless, and carrying the particular certainty of a 4-year-old who has simply said a true thing out loud. "You look just like us, Alpha King." The great hall of Blackmount Palace is very large and very quiet in the instant that follows, as if the stone itself has paused to listen. Maren, standing 6 feet behind her daughter, with her son pressed hard against her hip, and the cold cliff face wall against her back, feels the world narrow to a single terrible point. She has been holding her breath for 2 days. Now she stops breathing altogether. Theron Voss, king of the Blackmount Pack, ruler of 3 territories, the most feared alpha on the continent, a man whose name had been used to frighten border wolves into compliance for at least a decade, drops his gaze from the assembled displaced persons at his feet and looks at the child standing at the front of the group. Her silver-flecked eyes look up into his. His silver-flecked eyes look down. Maren has known this moment was possible since the day she learned she was carrying twins. She had planned for it the way you plan for a flood, obsessively, in layers, with every contingency she could imagine stacked against every likely failure. She had chosen a border town with no pack ties. She had taken a false name. She had never once brought the children within sight of wolf territory, not in 4.5 years, not under any pressure, not for any reason. But the fire had come, and then the border patrol, and now she is here, in this palace, 6 feet behind her daughter, with nothing left between her and the truth. She ran to prevent this moment. This is the story of why she was wrong too. 5 years. 5 years and 3 weeks, though Maren had stopped counting the days somewhere around the end of the 2nd year, when counting had stopped feeling like survival and started feeling like something she did to cause herself pain. Ashwood was not a beautiful town, and had never tried to be. It occupied the specific geographic category of places that exist because of convenience rather than intention. A crossroads at the exact seam between wolf territory and human land, claimed by neither jurisdiction and protected by neither authority, largely invisible to both. Its buildings leaned at collaborative angles. Its market smelled of smoke and fish, and the faintly sour undertone that seemed to be woven into the air itself, untouchable by any season. The one road through its center turned to mud from the first hard frost to the final thaw, which in this particular stretch of the world meant roughly 7 months of the year. The other 5, it was dust. Maren had chosen it because no one would look for her here. She had been exactly right. She ran a herb work stall at the back of the covered market, wedged into a narrow space between a woman who sold dyed wool in shades that seemed optimistic for the climate, and a man who repaired boots without speaking to his customers, an approach to commerce Maren had come to understand as deeply reasonable. Her stall had a canvas front, a work table, and a collection of dried plants she sourced from the forest, and the occasional gray market trading connection she had built over 5 years. Slowly, carefully, without letting anyone get close enough to ask questions she could not answer with her false name and her invented history. She was known in Ashwood as Wren, a widow from the Eastern Valleys, 2 small children, no family to speak of. People in border towns did not generally produce curious people. They produced tired ones. No one had ever pressed her on the details. The morning the rogues came was a Tuesday. She remembered this afterward with the disproportionate clarity of small facts that lodge at the edges of catastrophe, like stones along the rim of a fire. She was grinding dried moonroot when it began, using the piece of brick she had salvaged from the collapsed wall behind the tanner's shop 6 months ago. She had owned a proper iron pestle for 3 years, a good one, heavy and balanced, bought with the first season's real earnings. She had sold it in the hard stretch of the previous winter, when Soren developed a fever that would not break, and the wolf medicine for wolf children ran expensive even on the gray market. And a pestle was a tool, and her son was her son, and there had been nothing to deliberate over. The brick was imprecise. It ground unevenly, and left faint gray dust in the finished powder that she had to sift out before weighing, because human customers did not trust gray powder in their medicine. It meant the work that should have taken an hour took 3. Her hands had changed in 5 years. The softness was gone, replaced by calluses that mapped exactly what she had done to survive. And sometimes, when she was very tired, she looked at them and thought about who she had been before. Not for long. Long was a luxury she had given up with the pestle. Mama? Soren appeared at the gap in the canvas separating her workspace from the front stall, dragging his small jacket by one sleeve and carrying the specific grievance of a younger sibling who has been wronged by someone better organized than himself. He was 4.5 and operated almost entirely on instinct, appetite, and a loyalty that was absolute and unconditional toward whoever he had decided deserved it. He had his father's jaw, that slight, stubborn ridge along the lower face that made even relaxed expressions look as though they were in the middle of deciding something. And she had spent 4 years learning to look at it without the sensation of being struck. She had not fully mastered this. Lyra took my button. Lyra. She said her daughter's name into the grinding evenly. Her daughter appeared behind Soren with the quality of someone who has been waiting in the wings because the stage was not yet properly arranged for her entrance. Lyra was 4 minutes older than Soren, a margin she held in the same regard that certain kings held their titles, as the incontrovertible foundation of everything else. She had given the button to a stray dog. This was, she explained carefully, a demonstrably better use of a button than what Soren had planned, which was to put it in his pocket and forget about it until it fell through the lining. Soren disputed this characterization. Lyra cited precedent. 3 previous buttons, all lost through the jacket lining. She had documentation in the form of her own clear memory, which she maintained was reliable. They were both, in this and in most things, entirely their father's children, though Maren never said so aloud. The argument resolved without her intervention, as their arguments generally did. Soren's objections were passionate, but brief. Lyra's logic was patient and inexhaustible tended to win. Eventually, Soren's grievance lost its structural integrity, and he moved on to the discovery of a beetle on the canvas wall, which proved more interesting anyway. Lyra pocketed the button with the satisfaction of someone who has confirmed what she already knew. Maren set down the brick and looked at her daughter. At the particular set of Lyra's chin as the matter closed, the direct silver-flecked clarity of her eyes, the absolute unaffected certainty with which she occupied space. She looked at Soren crouched over the beetle with the focused wonder of someone for whom the world is still full of genuinely surprising things. She loved them the way she breathed, constantly, without decision, without the option of otherwise. The fear she carried for them was the same shape, same constancy, same inability to turn off. She had made a life on the border because this was where wolf children could be unremarkable, where slightly too sharp senses and the instinct for hierarchy, and the way they both went completely still at the sound of threat, were different, not wrong. She had balanced the risk of proximity to wolf territory against the risk of a human life that would eventually ask them to be something they were not. And she had chosen the border, and she had been afraid about that choice every single day for 4.5 years. The smoke reached her before the sound did, She was a wolf, even if she was a wolf living as nothing, and her nose identified building smoke before her mind had finished translating. Thatch, green wood, something structural, all of it at once. The particular sweet, acrid smell of a town burning. She was moving before the first scream from the direction of the market. The canvas came down. The brick went onto the work table. She stepped into the covered corridor and saw, through the gap in the far wall, the orange pulse of fire against the gray morning sky in the direction of the granary. Rogue packs had hit 3 border towns in the past season. The pattern was always the same. Hit where there was no pack, no protection, no authority to answer to. Take what could be taken. She had followed the reports, tracked the direction they were spreading, quietly stalked the emergency shelter she kept in the forest north of town. She went back through the canvas. Soren, Lyra. 2 words, the tone she used only for this, low, flat, carrying every wolf instinct she had, and they came to her without hesitation. Soren dropped the beetle consideration. Lyra's button was already in her pocket. They pressed against her sides, and she felt their heartbeats through her ribs, and she grabbed the bag she had kept packed behind the corner shelf for 4 years, and she did not look at the stall she had built from nothing. She went out the back. The forest behind Ashwood she knew in her body, rather than her mind. Left at the split oak, right at the stream, north through the dense stand of pine that smelled of cold resin, until the ground rose and the trees thinned, and there was the charcoal burner's shelter she had restocked twice a year, as quiet insurance against exactly this. She ran well. She had always been fast. The forest did not ask about her name or her history, and the body does not forget its capacities just because the context changes. Soren ran with her hand gripping his. Lyra kept pace alongside with the efficient focus of a child who has understood this is not the moment for questions. Neither of them was crying. She felt that steadiness in them, and it steadied her in return. The way a flock of birds turns together, instinct flowing between them without language. She heard the rogues before she saw them. Movement in the brush, too heavy for deer and too careless for any trained patrol wolf, and she changed direction once, then twice, keeping north. 20 feet to the stream crossing. 15. They cut her off. 3 of them, men in half shift, the frenzied burnt copper of rogue eyes. Eyes that had been too long outside pack structure, too long without the bonds that kept wolves connected to the parts of themselves that could reason. They were not deliberate in their cruelty. They were simply operating on very little that could be called thought. She pulled the twins behind her and stood her ground. Not from bravery. From the wolf's knowledge that running was invitation. The other soldiers came from the south. 4 of them. Blackmount Border Patrol, in dark uniform. The insignia she recognized before she could stop herself from recognizing it. They moved through the rogue confrontation quickly and without theater, and the fight was brief in the way that trained soldiers against half-shifted rogues tends to be brief. The lead soldier turned to her afterward. He was young, 25 at most, with a serious face and the watchful stillness of someone whose job requires reading situations before speaking. He looked at her. He looked at the children. She watched his nostrils move in that almost imperceptible way that wolves tested air without noticing they were doing it. His expression shifted, no longer neutral. "You're in Blackmount territory," he said. She looked at the stream. She had known where the border was for 5 years, had mapped it, respected it, kept 12 feet between herself and it on principle. The current had taken her across in the dark of running. "My town is on fire," she said. "I know. No unkindness in it. You'll need to come with us." She looked at her children. Soren had her hand, and Lyra's hand both. Lyra was looking at the soldier with those silver-flecked eyes, taking steady inventory. 4.5 years old, and already assessing strangers like a general reviewing terrain. "Are my children safe with you?" Maren said. "Yes," the soldier said. Plain and direct and unadorned. She believed it. She picked up her bag. She took Soren's other hand. She let them lead her north. The Blackmount Palace rose from the cliff face, the way something inevitable rises, as if the cliff had always belonged to it and had simply grown to accommodate. Dark stone, wide ramparts, the great oak doors she had seen only in her imagination, which turned out to be less grand and more severe than she had pictured. It was not designed to impress. It was designed to last. They were processed in a courtyard. A staff member with a ledger collected names and circumstances from the small group of displaced Ashwood residents, mostly human, a handful of wolf besides herself, all of them marked by smoke and the particular hollowed quality of people who have left a place in a hurry. Maren gave her false name without hesitation. Wren of the Eastern Valleys. 2 children, displaced by the rogue attack. No pack affiliation. The room she was given in the East Wing had 2 narrow beds, rough wool blankets, a water basin, and a window that looked into the inner courtyard. The door did not lock from the inside. She noted this without expression and said nothing about it to anyone. She settled the twins. Soren was hungry in the practical wolf-child way, not complaining, simply running low, the way a fire runs low and needs fuel. Lyra had found a small stone in her pocket of indeterminate origin and was cleaning it against her sleeve with focused attention. Maren opened the emergency bag and produced the bread and hard cheese she always kept in it, and they ate without ceremony on the edges of the narrow beds, and she watched them eat and held in her chest the specific feeling of having survived an immediate crisis while a much larger one remained pending. She needed to think clearly. She was inside Blackmount, not near it, not at its border. Inside its walls, inside his territory, with his soldiers in the corridors and his staff collecting her false name and her children's faces visible to anyone with wolf senses and enough attention to look at them properly. If she was processed and released in 2 days, she could manage this. She could take the children south, further from wolf territory, find another border town, build it again. She had done it once. She could do it again if she had to. She was not released in 2 days. The first day passed in the suspended quality of waiting. A staff member brought food. A healer came briefly to check the children for smoke exposure and said nothing notable. Lyra conducted a thorough inventory of the room's surfaces. Soren found a crack in the wall plaster that interested him deeply. Maren sat between their beds at night and listened to the palace breathing around her. The sounds of a large inhabited place, footsteps, distant voices, the muffled quality of other people's ordinary lives. And she told herself she was still managing this. She was still telling herself that when he came on the second morning. She heard the change in the corridor before she understood it. The quality of footsteps was different. The guards outside her door shifted in some subtle postural way she caught through the wall without seeing it, the way you feel weather before it arrives. A king's presence had a specific gravity. She had felt it before, in a different time, and the body's memory did not require her cooperation to function. She moved the twins against the inner wall. He came down the corridor with 2 of his betas and the staff member with the ledger, reviewing records from the border event, asking questions in that low, unhurried voice she had kept in a sealed room inside herself for 5 years. She could hear him through the door. Not the words. The register. That specific quality of authority that came not from volume, but from the absolute absence of uncertainty. The door opened. He stepped inside with his eyes on the ledger, speaking to the staff member about documentation, and neither of them looked at her yet. She stood near the far wall with her hands at her sides and her chin level, and her gaze fixed at a point just to the left of the doorframe. Not avoiding, not directly meeting, just keeping herself oriented without collapsing toward the thing that could hurt her. Then he turned. The scent reached him before his eyes finished their sweep of the room. She watched the pause, the half-second where the alpha's instinct processes what the thinking mind has not yet caught, where the body recognizes before the person does. She had seen that pause once before, the first time they had met, 5 years ago, when the bond had announced itself in both directions, and neither of them had known what to do with the announcement. He looked at her. 5 years had not made him someone she could look at without cost. He was heavier with authority now, more fully inhabited by his own power, the way stone walls become more themselves the longer they stand. The jaw was the same. The particular set of the shoulders was the same. His eyes were the same impossible silver gray that she had found in two small faces every morning for 4.5 years, and told herself firmly she was not doing what she was doing. He looked at her for 2 full seconds. Then he looked at the children. Lyra looked back without particular concern. She had, in her short life, faced down aggressive merchants, a feverish Soren at his most irrational, and the large dog who had wanted the button. She was not, at her foundation, subject to intimidation. She looked at the Alpha King of the Black Mount Pack and said, plainly and clearly, with the full guileless authority of a small person naming what she sees, "You look just like us, Alpha King." The air in the room changed. The staff members stopped writing. Both betas stilled with the completeness of soldiers receiving a command. No one spoke aloud. Theron Voss went motionless in the way that very controlled, very powerful men go motionless when the ground moves beneath them without warning. Not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of the moment before. He looked at Lyra's eyes. He looked at Soren's eyes. He looked at the specific architecture of Soren's brow, the slight stubborn ridge above it that Maren had spent 4.5 years looking at and filing very carefully into the part of herself she no longer visited. When he looked back at Maren, something had opened in his face beneath the authority. Something older and unguarded, a fault line she had not known he possessed, running along the seam between the king and the man. He said very quietly, "Everyone out." The betas left without a word. The staff member gathered the ledger and went. The door closed with a sound that was barely a sound at all. Maren held her children's hands and did not move. "Stay," he said, to the guards, to the corridor, to the stone, and not to her, though the word landed in the room between them anyway. He looked at her children for a long time without speaking. The silence was not empty. It was the fullest silence she had ever stood inside. The kind of silence that exists when something enormous has just entered a space and the room has not yet adjusted to containing it. "Their eyes," he finally said. "I don't know what you mean." Her voice was steady. She had built steadiness the way she had built everything in the last 5 years. Out of necessity, without elegance, one day at a time. Maren. He said her name, her real name, not Ren, not the border widow, not the false person she had constructed over herself like a coat. Her name, the one she had not heard from anyone in 5 years who knew what it meant when he said it. "Do not." She said nothing. He looked at Soren. Soren, uncharacteristically quiet since the man appeared, was studying Theron with the particular careful attention of a wolf child who has encountered something he cannot yet classify. The resemblance between them, the jaw, the brow, the specific way both of them held stillness, was not subtle if you were looking for it. Theron's voice, when it came again, had lost its official quality entirely. "What are their names?" Maren hesitated 1 second too long. "Lyra," her daughter said helpfully, because the pause had been long enough. "And that's Soren. He's 4 minutes younger and he's sensitive about it." Soren, offended, turned to his sister. Theron made a sound. Not a laugh exactly, something that came from the same place a laugh comes from, but had passed through something much harder on the way out. He looked at Lyra with an expression Maren had not prepared for and could not fully name. Then he looked back at Maren, and what was in his face was not the cold, controlled authority she had braced herself against. It was the face of a man standing in the middle of a collapse. "She stays," he said, his voice carrying through the closed door to the guards outside. "The children stay. No one processes them further. No one moves them. Without my direct order. No one." He looked at Maren one more time. A long look, a look she would carry, and then he walked out, and his footsteps in the corridor were not the same footsteps she had heard arriving. She sat down on the edge of the bed because her legs had made the decision before she did. "Mama," Lyra said, after a thoughtful pause. "He has your eyes, too." Maren closed her own eyes. "Go and play," she said. He came back that evening, alone. She had spent the day deciding what she would and would not give him. Not tactically. There was nothing tactical available to her. She had no allies in this palace, no exit she had not already mentally sealed, no leverage that did not involve the children, and she would not use the children as leverage. So she had spent the day deciding instead what she owed him. Nothing, she had concluded. She owed him nothing. What she owed her children was more complicated, and it made the first conclusion considerably harder to hold. He sat down in the room's single chair without asking. Not arrogance, the simple habit of a man whose right to occupy space is never questioned. She remained standing. It was a small advantage, and she took it. "How long?" he said. "I have nothing to say to you. How long have you known about them?" She crossed her arms over her chest. "I will take my children and go as soon as you allow it. I am not asking anything of you, and I do not want anything from you. That is not going to happen." He said it without heat, which was worse than anger. Anger she could have matched directly. This was something older, the certainty of someone who has decided something at a level that runs below reason. "So you can choose whether we do this with honesty or without it. But we are doing this." She looked at the window. The valley was darkening below the cliff. The stone was the same cold it had been all day. This place held cold the way certain silences did, at a depth that ordinary warmth could not reach. "I didn't know when I left," she said finally. She had decided, in the long, quiet hours of the afternoon, that she would give him this much. It was true, and she was tired of being the only person who had ever carried all of it. "I found out 6 weeks after. I was already gone." Something moved through his face. 6 weeks, he repeated. "Yes. And then you... What would I have come back to?" She said it cleanly, without bitterness, keeping her voice factual, as if she were giving a report. "You had made your choice. You had your Luna. You had the alliance with the Northern Pack. You had stood in front of your Beta Council and told them the mate bond was a biological accident that could be declined in favor of rational governance. That a king required more than biology." She held his gaze. "I was not going to return and ask you to accept something you had already decided was beneath you. You were my fated mate." The phrase landed between them with the weight of something that had been waiting 5 years for someone to say it aloud. "You were also the man who rejected me publicly," she said. "So yes, I found out 6 weeks after I left and I made a decision, and I have lived with that decision. I am not asking you to approve of it. They are mine. Quiet. Absolute. Marin, those children they are mine." She did not raise her voice because she did not need to. "I have fed them and raised them and gotten up in the dark for 4.5 years whenever one of them had a nightmare. I have ground their medicine with a piece of brick. I have nursed them through fevers alone on the floor of a border town room and bargained with anything that would listen because I had nothing else to offer. I have loved them every single day of their lives, without a morning off, and without a single day of help from another person. They are mine in every way that counts." He did not argue this. He was gripping the arm of the chair with one hand, and she could see the tension in his knuckles from where she stood. "Before the council meeting," he said. He started the sentence twice. The second time, he continued. "I was told you had been tested. By the pack healer. That the results showed you were unable to carry wolf children. That a fated bond without a successor line was indefensible as the basis for a king's primary." She stared at him. "No one tested me," she said. The words came out slowly, each one carrying its own weight. "No pack healer ever came near me. I was never..." Elder Aldrich brought the documentation himself. He watched her face. "I reviewed it. I accepted it because..." He stopped. He tried again. "I had been under months of pressure from the council, and I had my own reasons for being afraid of what the bond meant. And when Aldrich came to me with documentation I could point to, I took it. I had been looking for a reason to do what I was already being pressured to do, and I took the first one offered to me. And I have been sitting with the cost of that for 5 years. The story she had built around her own life, the story that had kept her moving, that had said she was rejected because she was insufficient, because a fated bond was not enough, because she was not enough, had a foundation that someone had put there deliberately. "Aldrich," she said. "Yes." She turned the name over. Elder Aldrich. She had met him once, briefly, in the weeks when she and Theron were new to the bond. A compact, precise man with the quality of someone who had decided on his own correctness long ago, and did not revisit it. "He falsified a medical record," she said. "That is what I believe." The silence between them was different now. Denser. Not the grief of old history, but something harder. The outrage of a lie that had been standing in the place of a truth for 5 years, propping up a structure built on nothing real. She heard the sound before she registered him moving. He was at the window. She had not seen him cross the room. He stood with his back to her, and one hand braced against the stone beside the frame, and the stone had a new fracture in it, sharp and clean, and his knuckles were bleeding where the wall had given way before his control had. He was very still, breathing harder than she had ever seen him breathe. In 3 months of proximity 5 years ago, through all the complexity and tension of a bond neither of them had known how to handle, she had never once seen the thing beneath his surface break through. He had been the most controlled person she had ever been close to, controlled in a way that felt structural, load-bearing, built to last. She could see what was under it now. The grief was there. The fury was there. And underneath both of those, something rawer. The specific anguish of a man who has discovered the story he was given was constructed. The harm he caused was not tragic necessity, but the outcome of someone else's deliberate design. And the cost had been paid not by him, but by the person standing 6 feet behind him. "Theron," she said. She had not intended to say his name. He turned from the wall. He looked at his own hand, the bleeding knuckles, the cracked stone, with a kind of distance, as if the hand belonged to someone else. "I need proof," she said. She kept her voice even. She needed it to be even. "Not your private explanation. Not your word to me alone. Aldrich is an elder with 30 years of standing in this pack. If he falsified documentation, I need evidence that cannot be recontextualized or dismissed." He looked at her. The rawness in his face settled, not back into the old controlled distance, but into something sharper. Purpose. Direction. The look of a man who has found what he needs to do. "I know where to start," he said. Brenna came the next morning. Maren had not requested her. She arrived at the door of the East Wing room with a healer's satchel and the deliberate knock of someone who has been deciding whether to knock for a very long time and has finally committed to it. She was perhaps 60, with silver-streaked hair pinned back with the functional severity of someone who had made peace long ago, with appearance being less important than work. Her hands, holding the clasp of her satchel, had a slight tremor in them. Not age, Maren thought. Something carried. Brenna was the Blackmount Pack's head healer, and she introduced herself simply, without title, and said, "The king didn't send me." Maren opened the door wider. "I came," Brenna said, stepping inside, "because I saw the children in the courtyard yesterday morning, and because I have been trying to tell someone what I know for 4 years and failing at every attempt, and because I am very tired of carrying this." The twins were in the far corner. Lyra had invented a pebble game at some point in the morning with elaborate rules she had not fully explained to Soren, which meant the scoring was currently mysterious to him and entirely clear to her. Brenna looked at them. She looked at their eyes. Maren watched the healer see exactly what she was looking at. "The blood test," Brenna said, turning back. "The one presented to the Alpha King as evidence of your infertility. I ran it." Maren held very still. "I ran a legitimate test," she said. "The results were normal. There was no abnormality. Nothing that could have produced the documentation Elder Aldrich presented to the council." She set her satchel on the work table and opened the clasp with those slightly unsteady hands. "Aldrich came to my records room 3 days before the council meeting. He told me the results would be transcribed differently before presentation. He told me the stability of the pack required a particular political outcome, and that the fated bond threatened it. He told me a small falsification would harm no one, that you would be compensated, that your rejection would be handled with dignity. She set a small journal on the table. He was wrong on all 3 counts. I knew it even then, and I chose to believe him anyway. Maren picked up the journal, found the marked page, looked at her own name in careful healer's handwriting, at the date, at results that said nothing wrong. That said, in the precise language of PAC health documentation, that she was healthy, unremarkable, normal in every measured respect. Her throat tightened. "You kept this," she said. I gave him a copy, which he altered. I kept the original. Brenna said it without self-defense, flatly, the way someone reports a fact they have no clean way to explain. I sent letters over the years that were returned. I requested audiences that were denied. I did not have your name, your location, any way to reach you directly. I had what I knew I had done, and what I knew should not have been done, and this journal, and the inability to destroy it. Maren looked at her daughter, who had just revised the Pebble game rules in her own favor, and was explaining the revision to Soren with complete sincerity. She looked at her son, who was holding one pebble up to the light, studying it for something only he was looking for. Brick ground powder, fever medicine, 4.5 years of a life built in the wrong place under a wrong name for a wrong reason. Aldrich. "You'll need to tell him directly," Maren said, "and stand before the council and repeat everything if he asks it." "Yes," Brenna said. "I will." She left without the journal. Maren sat with it in her lap for a long time, listening to Lyra announce another scoring revision, and Soren cheerfully dispute it, and she held the small book that contained a version of her life that had always been true, but had been buried, and she did not cry, because she had finished crying about this particular thing somewhere in the 2nd year, and what she felt now was not grief, but the specific feeling of standing in the cleared space where grief has been, and finding out what the ground under it looks like. She got up and went to find Theron Voss. He was already in the corridor. She understood when she saw his face that Brenna had gone to him first or simultaneously. That the conversation she had just had and the one he had just had were the same conversation, spoken in 2 rooms, and that whatever he had learned had reorganized him the same way she felt reorganized. He looked at the journal in her hands. She held it out. He reached for it, and his fingers brushed hers, and neither of them moved for a moment. Standing in the cold stone corridor with the journal passing between them and 5 years, and a lie and 2 children and a mate bond that had never released no matter how carefully she had tried to let it, and she felt the bond stir in her chest the way it always did in proximity to him, warm, specific. The recognition that did not require her cooperation. He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. "After," he said. "After Aldrich. Give me until after." She stepped back. "I'll be with my children," she said. The PAC assembly was called at dusk. The great hall was lit with oil lamps along the walls, casting everything in the kind of warm light that makes stone look older and more storied than daylight allows. Maren stood at the back with the twins pressed close on either side of her. Lyra very still, reading the room with every wolf instinct she possessed. Soren holding Maren's hand with both of his, in the way he did when he was uncertain about something, and was choosing closeness over questions. Theron moved to the center of the hall with the journal, and a second document, Brenna's healer's certification, the original records, and he had a quality of stillness around him that she recognized. Not the stillness of control, the stillness of purpose. Elder Aldrich sat with the rest of the council at the long table near the front. She watched him understand what was happening before Theron spoke. The certainty in his face, that deep-seated conviction of a man who has spent 30 years being certain he was correct, encountered something it had not prepared to meet, and for the first time she could see it beginning to waver. The truth-telling was invoked. She had read about it in PAC histories as a girl, in her first life when she had still believed such ceremonies belonged to other people's stories. An old custom. The Alpha's formal demand for complete disclosure, binding on every wolf who had sworn loyalty to the PAC, Impossible to resist without severing the pack bond entirely. It was reserved for accusations of harm at the pack level. She had never seen it performed. Theron invoked it quietly, without theater, and the weight of it moved through the assembled wolves like a second temperature in the room. Aldrich tried first to defend himself on grounds of necessity. The political alliance with the Northern Pack had been real. The threat to Blackmount's northern border had been genuine and serious. The Elder Council's concern about a king binding himself to a low-standing Omega at such a critical political moment had been, he said, legitimate. "You falsified a medical record," Theron said. Under the truth-telling, Aldrich said yes. He had instructed the pack healer to alter the documentation. He had presented false medical evidence to the king and the council. He had done this knowing the Omega in question would be rejected without any ability to dispute the cause, that she had no standing to contest it, that she would simply disappear into the borderlands, and the matter would close itself. "You separated me from my fated mate," Theron said. "Yes. You separated me from my children." A silence. Then, "Yes. Without any authority to make that decision on my behalf." Here Aldrich was quiet for a long moment. The truth-telling held him in its current, and there was no swimming against it. "I believed," he said finally, "that the decision was mine to make on behalf of the pack, that the long stability of Blackmount required it." "The pack," Theron said, "will decide what it requires." Merrin became aware that Aldrich was looking at the twins. He looked at them the way she had looked at the journal, with the particular expression of someone confronting the specific human cost of an abstract decision, seeing it for the first time as people rather than as variables in a calculation he had made years ago and managed, since then, not to examine directly. She held Lyra's hand tighter. Theron stripped him of his eldership in front of the assembled pack. Brief, precise. The violation named plainly, the consequence stated plainly. Exile to the Eastern Holdings, not violence. Removal. The end of his authority, the end of his standing in the pack that had been, for 30 years, the full extent of his world. Aldrich accepted it. He walked to the hall doors, and through them, and they closed behind him, and the sound of that closing was different from every other sound in the room. The hall was quiet. Then Marn became aware that she was being looked at. Not all of the assembled wolves, but enough. The quality of the attention had changed from when she had arrived as a displaced border person from a burning town. Something had shifted in the room. The pack was recalibrating in the way that packs do when the order of things is revealed to have been built on a false foundation and corrected. She did not yet know what to do with being seen. Theron looked toward the back of the hall and found her face across the length of the room and held it for a breath. And two. She picked up Soren, who had reached the limit of his stores and was beginning to lean against her with the boneless full weight of a tired child. She took Lyra's hand. She went back to the East Wing to put her children to bed, and she did not let herself think about what came next until they were asleep and the room was quiet, and she was alone with the sound of the palace at night. He knocked after midnight. The twins were deep in sleep. Soren with one arm thrown over his face as if shielding himself from something even now. Lyra with her knees drawn up and both hands curled near her chin, in the precise posture she had held since she was weeks old, as if protecting something even at rest. Marn had sat between their beds for an hour, doing what she did every night, listening to them breathe, both of them, the two most ordinary and extraordinary sounds in her world, and she was not surprised when the knock came. She had been waiting for it without admitting she was waiting. She opened the door. He was alone. No guards, no betas. He had removed the formal council jacket and stood in plain dark clothing in the torchlit corridor, and he looked different, not diminished, reduced, in the specific way that comes after you have done the necessary hard thing, and the scaffolding of purpose falls away, and you are left with only yourself and whatever your hands are holding. She stepped back from the door without speaking. He entered. He looked at the children sleeping, and did not speak for a long time. She waited. She had learned, in the long practice of the last 5 years, that she did not need to fill silence. I didn't know how to want the bond, he said finally. He said it quietly, to the sleeping children rather than to her, as if the confession were easier addressed sideways. When it formed, I understood what it was, intellectually. I had studied fated bonds, their history, their political implications. I knew the mechanics. A pause. I had watched my father after my mother died. 3 years of watching him come apart at the seams. Every decision shaped by what was no longer there to anchor him. 3 years of choices made by a man who had built his entire gravity around a single person. And when that person was gone, the gravity went with her. I had watched packs fail that way. Good packs. Strong alphas who became inadequate to the thing they were supposed to carry, because the thing they loved had become the center of the load-bearing structure. He stopped. I had decided, before I was old enough to have a real decision to make, that I would not allow the bond to do that to me. She looked at the side of his face. And then it formed, he said, and I felt exactly what I had been afraid of feeling. And Aldrich gave me a reason I could point to. And I was grateful for the reason even as I knew what I was doing with it. And I have spent 5 years being competent and functional and present for this pack, and hollow at the center of all of it. And I think I deserve that. The hollow. I think it was accurate. Myron was quiet. He turned from the sleeping children and looked at her. The rawness was quieter now, more contained, but it was present in his face. The specific open quality of a person who has, at least in this room, at least tonight, stopped managing himself. I am not asking for forgiveness, he said. Not tonight. I think there is a great deal of time required before we speak about forgiveness, and I want to give you that time without asking you to compress it. Yes, she said. There is. There will be. Is the bond still alive in you? He asked. I can feel it. I have felt it since you walked into this palace, and your scent reached me in that corridor. But I need to hear you say it. She looked at him for a long moment. You know the answer, she said. You've known since I walked in. You felt it the same second I did, and you know it. I needed to hear you say it anyway. She stepped toward him. She raised her hand and set it against his jaw, the way she had done 5 years ago, in the early weeks of the bond when everything was still uncertain and full, when she had been 22 and the world had briefly been enormous and terrifying in the best possible way. He went completely still under her touch. Not the stillness of control, the stillness of a person receiving something they have not allowed themselves to want for a very long time. 5 years, she said. Yes. Those children could have had a father for 5 years. Yes. I could have had a home. She had not planned to say this part. It came out quietly, without drama, which was perhaps why it landed the way it did. Yes. His voice was rough with something that was not anger. Yes, all of it. Everything you should have had and didn't, and everything they should have had. Every day of it. She kept her hand against his face and felt the bond move through her fully for the first time. The warmth of it, the deep, specific recognition, the feeling of something long and carefully damned finally being given permission to move. She had been managing the bond for 5 years, the way she had managed everything else, with the same systematic suppression that was the only way she had known to keep herself functional. She had not felt it fully since the night she walked away from Blackmount and told herself she was not coming back. She turned his face very slightly toward hers. I am furious with you, she said. I know. I will be furious with you for a long time. I know that too. I expect it. He turned his head and pressed his lips against her palm. Quiet and brief. The simplest possible gesture. It undid her more thoroughly than anything elaborate would have. And the bond, she confirmed. He closed the distance the rest of the way. What passed between them in that room was made of 5 years of absence, and the specific grief of 2 people who had been kept from their own lives by someone else's deliberate lie. It was made of fury and relief and tenderness and the particular hunger of a mate bond that had been denied long enough to have a weight and shape entirely its own. He held her without the management she had always felt underneath his touch before, that quality of a man deciding as he went how much of himself to allow into the contact. There was nothing of that now. He held her the way a man holds the thing he has spent 5 years understanding was his to hold. She gave him the weight of 5 years, the fear and the grinding and the long dark nights when the fever peaked and she had nothing left and got up anyway. The false name, the calluses, the specific loneliness of loving children who looked like someone she had told herself she was finished grieving. She gave him all of it, and he held it without flinching. She let herself receive what he offered, without the defensive monitoring she had learned on the border, the constant assessment, the contingency thinking, the part of herself that had not fully rested in 4.5 years because resting was not safe. She let it go, not as naivety, not forever, but for this specific territory, this room, this night, this man and this bond that had been real since before either of them had been ready for real things. The palace was quiet around them. The valley below the cliff breathed its cold, dark air. Through the thin wall, she could hear her children sleeping, deep and even and entirely unafraid, the breathing of people who have no idea that the world just shifted on its axis. She lay with her head against his chest and listened to his heartbeat for a long time without speaking, and he did not speak either, and the silence between them was not the same as before. It was a different kind of full. "Lyra will have questions," she said eventually, into the dark. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. More than questions. "She'll have evaluations, a probationary structure. Criteria you aren't aware of yet. I expect to fail the first assessment," he said. And this time it was fully a laugh. Quiet and real and warm in a way that moved through his chest into her cheek. And work up from there. She felt the bond in her own chest. Open, settled, warm, like an ember given oxygen after a very long cold. "She's like you," she said. "The way she thinks. The patience of it. God help us both," he said. "Soren is the one you'll need to be ready for," she said. "He won't ask questions until he's ready. But when he asks, he'll mean every word, and he'll remember every answer. Then I'll wait until he's ready. I have time." She believed this. She did not know yet if she could believe everything, or how long the believing would take to extend to everything. But she believed this, tonight, in this room, with his heartbeat under her ear, and the bond settled fully in her chest for the first time in 5 years. She slept. In the morning, Lyra found them. Her footsteps in the corridor had a quality that distinguished them from Soren's, deliberate, purposeful, the gait of someone who had decided where they were going before they stood up. She appeared in the doorway in her sleep clothes with her hair falling loose and the replacement button turning between her fingers, and she looked at Theron sitting up in the gray morning light with the composure of a man who had decided in the small hours that this was going to go well, and was fully committed to that decision. She studied him. "Are you staying?" she said. "Yes," Theron said. Lyra came into the room and climbed to the foot of the bed without ceremony, and sat cross-legged with the button in her lap. "Soren's still sleeping. He sleeps too long." "It was a hard week," Marin said. "It was a hard week for everyone." Lyra turned the button and continued her assessment of Theron, with the patient thoroughness of someone who is not going to rush this. "Do you know how to fix jacket clasps?" "I do," he said. "Good. Soren's is always broken. I've told him it's a design flaw in that particular jacket, but he won't get a different one because he likes the color." A pause. "He's sentimental about colors. I want you to know that before you say anything about it." "I won't say anything about it," Theron said. Lyra considered this answer and appeared to find it adequate. She turned the button once more. "Are you going to be our papa?" Marin heard her own heartbeat very clearly. Theron held Lyra's gaze without flinching, without looking to Marin for the answer, which Lyra would have noticed and recorded. "If you'll have me." Lyra weighed this with the gravity of someone making a significant administrative decision about a matter of consequence. "Probationary," she said. 90 days at minimum. I'll explain the expectations. Soren's expectations are simpler than mine, but he feels everything more deeply, so do not dismiss them just because they're smaller. That's the most important rule. Understood, Theron said. I won't. Lyra gave one deliberate nod. The matter was settled to her current satisfaction. She went to investigate the water basin with great interest, apparently having concluded the interview. Marin found Theron's hand beneath the blanket and took it. He laced his fingers through hers immediately, without looking, without needing to. The way you take the hand of someone whose hand you already know. Soren appeared 20 minutes later with sleep-pressed cheeks and his jacket half open, the clasp jammed as it always was. He crossed the room directly to Theron and held the clasp up for attention with the simple assurance of a child who has decided, without quite knowing the moment he decided it, that this person is available to be asked for things. Theron fixed the clasp. Soren inspected the fix, approved of it with the nod of a young expert confirming the work of a capable apprentice, and then sat down against the wall with the bread heel he had apparently brought as a breakfast precaution, and ate with the focused satisfaction of someone doing the most important thing in the world. The morning light came through the narrow window at an angle that caught the stone and made it briefly, improbably, golden. 3 days later, in the great hall with the pack assembled and the moon visible through the high windows in a pale half-disk, Theron Voss named Marin his Luna. He did not give a long speech. He was not, in formal settings, a man who filled space with more words than the moment required. He said she was his fated mate, that she had raised his bloodline through 5 years of exile, under circumstances that were a debt the pack owed, and he owed personally, and that they would know her as they would know their own heartbeat, as something they could not be complete without. Lyra stood beside Marin with her chin tipped up, and both hands clasped precisely in front of her, like a small official attending a ceremony she had anticipated and found satisfactory. The replacement button was secured. She had checked it twice before the ceremony. Soren held Marin's hand with both of his, and periodically squeezed it, which was how he expressed most of his large feelings, and she squeezed back every time. Marin stood in the great hall of a palace she had entered as nobody, as Wren of the Eastern Valleys, a false widow with a bag of emergency supplies and 2 children she was trying to keep invisible, and she let the pack's recognition settle around her. Not as something she needed. She had not needed it. She had lived without it for 5 years and built a real life out of the living. But there was a difference between not needing a thing and not being owed it. And she had been owed this for 5 years. And receiving it now, finally, was not rescue. It was correction. She was not the same woman who had been rejected. That woman had been young and frightened, and had believed, somewhere under the righteous certainty, that the rejection was at least partly what she deserved, that if she had been more, different, better, the king would have found a reason to keep her. This woman had spent 5 years in evidence of her own capability. This woman had ground medicine with a broken brick, and sat on the floor of a border town room at 3 a.m. with a fevered child, and gotten up the next day and done it again. This woman did not need anyone's recognition to know who she was. But home was something anyway, not the same as needing it, just what it was. After the ceremony, when the hall returned to its ordinary noise, and Lyra had already identified 3 different betas to engage in varying debates, and Soren had fallen asleep standing against Marin's hip, Theron bent close and spoke quietly against her temple. She's going to run this pack, he said, before she's 20. Marin looked at her daughter, who was currently making a point to a beta soldier twice her height. One finger raised, the argument clearly structured, the soldier appearing to take careful mental notes. I know, Marin said. I am completely sincere when I say I'm looking forward to it, he said. He slid his arm around her, unhurried, unguarded, with nothing underneath it that needed managing, nothing being withheld or decided or kept back. She leaned into him and felt the warmth of it, the specific, ordinary warmth of a life that was finally arranged the way it was always supposed to be. Across the hall, Lyra looked up. She found her mother's eyes through the crowd with the unerring precision she applied to most things. She gave one small, decisive nod. The button was secure. The matter was settled. Everything was exactly as it should be.